From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Featured today, K-State's Romulo Lollato with a thorough look at winter wheat planting in Kansas. Romulo will go over the variations in optimum planting dates and rates across Kansas and what K-State research says about the prime date for seeding in each region. He'll look at how seed size affects that seeding rate and the ultimate final stand. Also, Romulo talks about the value of having seed cleaned and how seeds per pound varies by variety, as discovered in another K-State study. Plus more wheat seeding input from Romulo next. Also, our regular Wednesday fare, this week's commentary on life in rural Kansas from K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven, and more on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Thanks for listening in. You're tuned to the midweek edition of Agriculture Today, where our focus during the first half hour is wheat planting. Timely enough, as some wheat has been sown in the state, but the bulk of the crop soon to be put in the ground over the coming weeks. And we've brought by, once more, Romulo Lollato, who is, as you know, a wheat production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Romulo has authored a collection of information on wheat planting in the Agronomy E-Update newsletter series, and we're going to draw from that. Romulo, one thing we might mention before we talk specifically about sowing dates and seeding rates is we have dry soils out there across a large part of Kansas. That's of concern right now, isn't it?
Hi, Eric. Yes, definitely. So if we remember, the early part of the summer, we had a considerable amount of rainfall, and that created some flushes of volunteer wheat. But really, from then on, some parts of the state have been dry. This very last week, we had some showers in parts of Kansas. And even I was checking for some fields that were kind of planted early for that forage system, dual-purpose system, that they had enough moisture to start coming up. But really, the topsoil, just the very topsoil, was pretty dry. So that's a concern because if growers are trying to reach moisture deep this early in the game, chances are that the soils are going to be hotter and we can result in some shortened coleoptile. So it's always a challenge to plant early with dry soils because they're hotter soils where it's going to likely decrease the length of our coleoptile. So sometimes going too deep can be a problem.
Well, that will take us nicely right into our first item, and that is the optimum sowing dates we like to strive for here in Kansas. And this can be broken down zone by zone in the state, and those zones or time frames are pretty reliable, aren't they?
Yeah, so, of course, the optimum planting date is going to be different in northwest Kansas from southeast Kansas, and then in between we have these zones more or less following this gradient that goes like from southwest to northeast, more or less, right? And the earlier planting date will be, of course, in northwest Kansas, where it's going to get cooler faster. So essentially, we suggest a planting date range from about that September 10th to about the September 30th, more or less. Historically, that has been what we recommended. Here recently, we did some evaluations, a long-term variety performance test, and trying to look at the planting date and how that related to yield. And for that northwest part of the state, what we found is that actually that September 25th was about the best planting date that we had, and then yield decreased pretty sharply after that. So if we're going late, we were actually losing anywhere from 3, almost 4 bushels per acre per day in yield potential. So why do we talk so much about planting date? Because the planting date is going to really define your yield environment for that season. If you plant too late, then, the crop has less time to tiller in the fall, and the entire crop development is going to be delayed. Even if it's slightly, it's going to be delayed. So heading date is going to be later, flowering is going to be later, grain field is going to be later as well. And so it's going to be placed in a much hotter environment, and that decreases your grain yield. So that's why delaying sowing decreases our grain yield, because we're changing the environment in which that plant is exposed to. Same thing if you're planting too early, right? We have a range of problems if you're planting too early. And sometimes we see a yield decrease even sharper from going too early than from going too late. And the reason is more related to other things like viral diseases, for example. So if you're planting too early, in western Kansas, you might be exposed to wheat streak mosaic, or in eastern Kansas, central Kansas, more exposed to barley yellow dwarf or something along these lines. And these viral diseases might actually much more sharply decrease the grain yield as compared to a later planting date, where we see a decrease as well, but a little bit less sharp. As we're going more to west central Kansas, between that September 25th and October 5th, still gives us a pretty good potential, but really the range is a little bit wider. We talk anywhere from September 15th to October 20th, right? And as we move southeast, now we're talking about like the south central part of the state and central part of the state, the peak of the yield potential in that area is about October 10th. Again, looking back in years and years of variety performance tests. And the range goes from September 25th to October 20th, more or less, the optimum range. And then we go to the very eastern portion of south central Kansas and into southeast Kansas, where we have a little bit more time. It's anywhere from October 5th to about October 20th. Again, with that optimum on about between October 10th and 15th as optimum planting day. Another thing, Eric, that we learned from that long-term variety trial data is that, yes, we have that peak in yield potential in each region. That peak goes down on both sides if we're going too early or too late, and it's sharper on the early side. But not only that, what we also learned from that data looking at the long term is that as we go to south central Kansas, the penalty from going too late is not as sharp as the penalty in northwest Kansas. So in other words, in northwest Kansas, we're losing 3 to 4 bushels per acre for every day that we delay planting. South central Kansas, we're more losing 1 to 1.2, more or less, all the way to that early November. And then after November 1st, November 2nd, that time frame, in south central Kansas, then things really decrease sharply and we start losing 2.5 bushels per acre per day.
And that is important to know, especially as we consider, once again, drier soil conditions and a forecast for minimal rain going forward. That may give that producer in the south central, southeastern part of the state some latitude in planting later, waiting for moisture.
That's correct. So right now, looking at the forecast for most of the state, there's really not much. And so if you are in western Kansas and there's some moisture in that top profile, you might be okay going now and getting that wheat drilled, as long as, again, you can get the seed in good moisture. If I'm probably in central and south central Kansas, and the soil might be a little bit drier, I would not be in as much of a hurry. I'll probably still wait, give it some time until we have a better chance of rain in the forecast so we can actually get that seed on the ground and still get a pretty good stand establishment.
Well, before we take a break, let's talk seeding rates for a second here. Once more, the optimum seeding rates will vary with the geographical location within the state of Kansas. Speak to that a moment.
Yeah, so that's a topic that comes up a lot as we are doing meetings with growers. And, we have, first thing that we need to talk about is we have had the mentality of doing everything in pounds per acre. And more we're trying to see that goes into seeds per acre, because that's really what we're putting out, right? And so you mentioned, Eric, that it changes based on region and on the state, and that's in fact true. Typically for western Kansas, we have lower seeding rates. Mostly the reason for that is western Kansas is a much drier environment than we have in central or eastern Kansas. But the wheat plant, it has a huge capacity to compensate if the stand is low and the environmental conditions are good, okay? So we recommend lower seeding rates out in western Kansas, because if we put too many seeds out there and the conditions are optimal, they're going to be a lush vegetative growth. We're going to get a lot of forage, a lot of biomass produced, and then that amount of forage is going to use more water that is going to dry that profile. So when it comes time for a grain field later, And when we really need that water to be producing grain, maybe if we went too heavy on the seeding rates, the profile might be dry and it might happen what we call haying off, which is essentially that crop runs out of water when it comes time to do grain fill. And we actually have a decreased kernel weight and a test weight and of course, grain yield. So seeding rates in Western Kansas are lower. We typically recommend anywhere from 750 to 900,000 seeds per acre, again, depending on planting date. As we delay planting date, we like to see that seeding rate being increased. In central Kansas, we started at 900,000 more or less and up to 1.1 or 1.2 million seeds per acre. Again, depending on planting date and also depending on tillage practice. Many times if you're going after no-till, where the soil is going to be a little bit cooler and perhaps the plant might tiller less, maybe a little bit higher seeding rates are recommended too. And in eastern Kansas, again, 1.1 all the way to 1.3, 1.4 million seeds per acre, which will be about the same amount that we recommend under irrigated conditions. So for the most part, the main factor affecting what seeding rate you're going to shoot for is going to be sowing date. So if you're planting late, know that you must be increasing those seeding rates just to compensate for the decreased tillering potential of the crop. If you're planting on time, you can be closer to that lower range of what we recommend and still be on the safe side there. So those were the recommendations, Eric, again, mostly affected by sowing date. And of course, sometimes fertility can affect these as well. If you're going into a field with history of manure where the soil phosphorus levels and nitrogen levels are like through the roof and you have good moisture conditions, some growers have been succeeding going with even lower seeding rates than what we actually recommend. But again, very specific conditions. For the most part, our recommendations would result in a very decent stand with a very good yield potential based on that sowing date.
But there are more variables involved here that a producer might want to think about as well. And when we come back after this break, Romulo, we'll get into those, if you'd stand by. He's Romulo Lollato, Wheat Production Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. More on achieving optimum wheat seeding in the fall with Romulo in a moment here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
We're back now on Agriculture Today, and with us once again is Wheat Production Specialist Romulo Lollato, K-State Research and Extension. We are walking through a number of considerations on maximizing the productivity of that new winter wheat stand at planting time. Romulo, we just finished talking about seeding rates for Kansas and how those differ from one border to the other. There's another aspect of this that you wrote another article about in the E-Update newsletter series recently, considering the size of the wheat seed itself and how that would figure into all of this.
Yes, so that's a very important topic there, Eric, and perhaps historically overlooked in the state here, and not only in Kansas, but in the entire region, right, where historically producers have planted in pounds of seed per acre rather than in actual seeds per acre. But while we may have gotten by doing that in the past, where most of the varieties, first we had fewer varieties, and second, most of the varieties were in between that 14,000 to 16,000 seeds per pound as far as seed size goes. So we would get by with that because there would be a small range in seed size. Now, if you look at other regions, right, regions where they grow spring wheat and maybe a little bit bigger seed or soft wheat with bigger seed as well, they have been growing it into seeds per acre for a long time now. And with as many varieties as we have here in the Great Plains, it's about time for us to start looking at that as well. So just to give a few examples of this year, right, several things are going to affect seed size, including how that field was managed as far as fertility, as far as fungicide use and whatnot. And then not only management, but also environment. If there was a drought stress or a heat stress, might result in smaller seeds or larger seeds. right? So there is that variation that even for the same variety, there's some variability within that variety. And the region of the state where that seed was produced is also going to affect the seed size. But not only that, the level of seed cleaning, right? If you're just harvesting your seed and keeping it in the bin and going straight into the field, essentially without cleaning it, you're probably going to have a considerably smaller seed as compared to if you're going to save your own seed, you're hiring somebody to clean that seed for you, or if you're buying new certified seed that's going to go through at least an air screen process and then a gravity table as well, really increasing the size of that seed, right? So it's very important because just give you a few examples of this season. So we were actually taking a look at different seed cleanings and seeing what's the seed size for the same variety if you're just going through that seed cleaning process. And essentially what we saw is that you can go from 15,000 more or less seeds per pound all the way to 14 or even 12,000 seeds per pound for the same variety just by cleaning, right? So we're really increasing the size of that seed, which is related to the vigor that seed's going to come out of the soil as well, and the vigor for those early seedlings and plantings as well. So seed cleaning is really going to affect that, but varieties as well. So we're just taking a look at this season, and some varieties like KS Dallas, Zenda, WB Grainfield, WB 4269, several of the varieties that we're planting in our own trials, and we're taking a look at their seed size, and it's ranging from about 12,000 all the way to about 17,000 seeds per pound. So a very large range based on variety and based on where that variety is produced. Now, why is it so important? Let's give these two examples. Okay, let's get these two extremes. A 12,000 seeds per pound variety, if you're planting 60 pounds per acre, you're putting 720,000 seeds out there. But the other variety that if you're planting 60 pounds per acre as well at 16,000 seeds per pound, you're putting close to 1 million seeds per acre out there. So you have 250, 300,000 more plants just because you're planting a smaller seed. So that's why it's so important for us to know the seed size of the varieties that we're planting before we actually go out there and just simply put a 60 or a 90 pound per acre rate. More important that we actually know what's the seed size of the variety and of the seed lot that we are planting.
And further on making this connection between seed size and the planting rate, we can't share it definitively on the radio here, but there is a chart that you've put together that combines these two variables, that is seeds per acre, target planting rate, and gives you an idea of what pounds of seed per acre are necessary. So you'd refer producers to that.
Yeah, so that table, the idea of it is to make producers' life easier. And
right.
So they just need to see, usually in the seed lot that they purchase from a certified seed, they're going to have how many seeds per pound that variety or that seed lot has, or they can just send a quick sample to the Kansas Crop Improvement Association and get that value back. So we have a range there from 10 all the way to 20,000 seeds per pound. And we have the target planting rate as well, from 600,000 all the way to 1.5 million seeds per acre. And the table just shows exactly what's the conversion of how many pounds of seed per acre you need based on seed size and based on your target seeding rate as well. So that table, the intention again is to make producers' life easier, just a quick checking there so they can adjust their drill. And as we just mentioned, the Kansas Crop Improvement Association here, and we are on this topic, we just finished the second year of a study that has been funded by the Kansas Crop Improvement Association, where we're looking at the value of seed cleaning, the value of seed treatment, and seeding rate as well, all over Kansas. Actually, we had, on the last 2 years, we had this study done in 17 locations across the state. So really a lot of locations out there for us to really try to nail down the value of these different seed cleaning and seed treatment and seeding rate. And what we saw there, averaging these last 17 locations that we studied during the last 2 years, was that on average, seed cleaning, so going from an unclean seed, so this is not a bin run, really, it's a seed that was produced from a seed production field, but it's no cleaning process at all, to the top of the gravity table, we were gaining about 4 bushels per acre. So the cost for that is actually quite cheap. I think it's less than $1 per bushel for you to clean the seed, and you're gaining 4 bushels on average per acre. So it's a no-brainer as far as the return on the investment, the process of seed cleaning. As far as seed treatment goes, we're still more close to that break even. So on average, the yield gain from seed treatment was about a bushel per acre, and the cost is closer to that $4 per acre. And so it's really close to that break even. So it's more an issue of ensuring that the crop is going to have a good stand establishment. Okay, because seed treatment increased the stand establishment, even though it didn't necessarily increase yield as much as the stand establishment. It's more of an insurance that you might have a good stand establishment in the end, even though the economic return we saw in cases where we gained up to 8 or 10 bushels per acre, but those are very rare. On average, it was just 1. And then increasing seeding rates from 600,000 to 1.2 million. So essentially, we were gaining about 7 to 8 bushels per acre in these last 17 sites that we did this study. So a very strong data there. I appreciate the Kansas Crop Improvement for the support, and we're repeating this trial in another 10 locations this year for more applied data for the grower. So again, almost a no-brainer gain in profit from the seed cleaning process, a break-even in profit from the seed treatment, but with a better stand establishment, and also using current seed prices. Also, it was worth increasing from 600,000 to 1.2 million on average, and even increasing just to 900,000 was also economical benefit in most of the situations.
One more thing here. What extra or additional adjustments does a producer need to make, Romulo, when they're seeding their wheat into row crop stubble later on following harvest?
Yeah, so whenever we're planting into row crop stubble, it really depends on what the crop we're talking about. So usually, for example, if we're talking about sorghum stubble, we usually talk about adding a few extra pounds of nitrogen out there, just because that very heavy stubble from the sorghum is going to tie up some of the nitrogen put out. So many times you're just putting that nitrogen out to help break down that stubble. It might be worth just going slightly higher on the seeding rate if we're going no-till on sorghum stubble or no-till into soybean stubble. Many times you see that the stand establishment might not be as good under no-till because of that heavy residue. And talking about heavy residue, another thing to be keeping in mind is that planting depth becomes very important. Sometimes the distribution of the residue from that row crop by the combine is not very even, and we end up with patches in the field where we have a much heavier amount of residue. And if we're keeping the seeding depth too shallow, that can be a concern down the road, because that crown is going to form too close to the soil surface, and the crop is going to be more exposed to winter kill or damage from low temperatures, right? Because the crown is too close to the surface, it's not going to be buffered by the soil. So a few things to keep in mind there. Make sure that the seeding depth is at least at 1.5 inches in central Kansas, and some growers go up to 2 inches in western Kansas. So we have enough soil buffering capacity there on top of the crown to buffer any winter kill injury potential.
All right, we'll call it good there, but we would refer you wheat growers to an in-depth series of articles that Romulo has recently put together on wheat planting, and those are found in the Agronomy E-Update newsletter series over the past couple of weeks at agronomy.ksu.edu. We're off and running for another wheat production season, Romulo. Thank you for sharing these thoughts, and we will undoubtedly talk again soon.
Thank you, Eric.
That from wheat production specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Romulo Lollato. On This Agriculture Today, and we will return with more on the K-State Radio Network.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, and welcome back. Eric Atkinson with you. And now for you, some of the lead stories in today's agricultural news. These courtesy in part of DTN. A Nebraska senator has introduced a bill that would establish minimum cash trade in regional markets for fed cattle. Senator Deb Fischer of Nebraska, a member of the Senate Agriculture Committee, announced her bill, which is titled the Cattle Market Transparency Act of 2020, yesterday. Fischer's bill, the second attempt by senators on the Agricultural Committee to introduce legislation that would establish a minimum cash trade. Senators Chuck Grassley of Iowa and John Tester of Montana introduced a bill earlier this year calling for a minimum 50% cash trade in each state. Fischer's bill would put the onus on the Secretary of Agriculture to determine regional mandatory minimum negotiated cash trade levels across the country. The USDA would seek public comment then and implement a plan. And under Fischer's bill, meat packers would be required to report the number of cattle scheduled to be delivered for slaughter each day for the next 14 days. That's a requirement Fischer noted already exists in the pork industry. The USDA would also create and maintain a library of marketing contracts between packers and producers and would require packers to provide that information. Still, Fischer's bill and the Grassley-Tester bill would need movement and action from the Senate Agriculture Committee. House Agriculture Committee leadership last month called for extended studies by the USDA on livestock markets, but that committee has not scheduled any hearings or meetings on the legislation either. Yesterday, the EPA released its draft risk assessment of the insecticide chlorpyrifos regarding dietary risks in adults and children, as well as professional handlers of the chemical. The agency's draft assessment also identifies potential adverse effects in mammals, birds, fish, and terrestrial and aquatic invertebrates. The EPA said it will open a 60-day public comment period on the risk assessment when it issues a proposed interim decision in October. That decision is expected to outline potential risk management options for the insecticide. In addition to considering public comment, the EPA said in a news release that it will also consider input and recommendations from a scientific advisory panel once that panel's report is released in December. Corteva announced back in February it was phasing out production of chlorpyrifos, the company citing falling demand for the product in the U.S. as the primary reason for that decision. The EPA said in its risk assessment that with limited remaining residential use of chlorpyrifos, the EPA found no risks of concern, including to children's health, when products are used according to the label instructions. Now, chlorpyrifos, as you might know, is the main ingredient in what was Dow AgroSciences and now is Corteva AgroSciences' Lorsban insecticide. First registered back in 1965, chlorpyrifos is an organophosphate insecticide used in a broad range of crops, including corn, alfalfa, cotton, wheat, and soybeans. It's been available under several brand names, including Lorsban and Cobalt. Between 2012 and 2014, Dow AgroSciences estimated that an average of 640,000 pounds were applied to an average of almost 800,000 corn acres per year. The EPA has vowed to continue its re-registration of chlorpyrifos, ensuring that generic formulations of the chemical will remain legal to use in the years to come. And USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue says that there are no plans to use the Commodity Credit Corporation to make payments to refiners that are denied small refiner exemptions under the Renewable Fuel Standard. And in fact, Reuters is reporting that the Trump administration has dropped a plan to use CC authority to make payments to refiners denied those SRE requests. The administration had been considering paying some $300 million to refiners and tapping the CCC authority to do so. But after outcry from Midwest lawmakers and even from some refiners, the administration has shelved that plan, according to the Reuters report. Late last evening, the House of Representatives also passed a short-term funding bill for the federal government that would prevent CCC funds from being used for oil refiners. The USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service held an all-day virtual public meeting to discuss efforts to reduce harmful salmonella in meat, poultry, and egg products. The USDA's Stephanie Ho reports.
USDA Deputy Undersecretary Mindy Brashear spoke at the Food Safety and Inspection Service's first ever virtual public meeting. The topic, salmonella.
I think most of us know that salmonella is a leading cause of foodborne illness. And outbreaks of salmonella illness have been linked to pork, poultry, beef, and egg products.
At the all-day public meeting, she presented USDA's roadmap to reducing salmonella.
I asked our team of microbiologists, epidemiologists, scientists, policymakers from across the agency to come together and to develop this roadmap for how FSIS will continue to aggressively target salmonella.
And what's the goal?
There's no question about where we want to land. Our destination is a future where we've reduced the number of salmonella infections due to foodborne products.
More information can be found online at fsis.usda.gov. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And in our weekly installment from Scarlett Hagens, we hear about a research project to help mitigate the spread of the coronavirus in processing plants being conducted right here in Kansas. Scarlett?
A team of Kansas State University researchers is using a $1 million grant from USDA and an additional grant from the state to study how to effectively control the spread of the coronavirus among employees in meat and poultry processing facilities. The study involves researchers from K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine, College of Agriculture, and Food Science Institute. They will collaborate with researchers from the University of Georgia's Poultry Science Department and the Naval Postgraduate School. The team will evaluate potential sources of exposure and determine the amount and longevity of infectious virus that is present during and after processing and packaging activities. A key objective of the study will be to identify, develop, validate, and deliver practical cleaning and disinfection strategies, plus develop mathematical models to predict and reduce the risk of coronavirus exposure in these facilities. In addition to the research team, the project also will rely on input from an industry advisory board composed of senior-level directors of food safety and plant operations at Hormel Foods, Smithfield Foods, National Beef Packing Company, Cargill Protein North America, JBS USA, Wayne Farms, Jennie-O Turkey Store, Tyson Fresh Meats, and Costco Wholesale. I'm Scarlett Hagens.
And that's a glance at today's agricultural news page. Gus Vander Hoeven is next here on the K-State Radio Network. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
After 46 years, I am entitled to have an opinion about Kansas.
That's Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Last week, I think it was Monday evening, there was a television program titled, What is Wrong with Kansas? I've heard that expression and question before. It irritated me, and I resisted watching the program. Maybe I should have watched it if I'm going to comment on it. In my book, there's nothing wrong with Kansas. In 1974, when I decided to accept the position of extension specialist in landscape and environmental horticulture at Kansas State, it is true that I heard comments from senior professors at VPI like, Gus, Kansas is a good place to go. They said it as if they encouraged me, that I was not making a mistake. It's also true that close friends in Blacksburg said, and I've said this before, you guys go to Kansas? Oh gosh, if we could say anything good about Kansas, we would, but we can't. It did not deter us in the least. At that time, I had 3 job offers in my hand, and we looked very carefully at each. One offer even came back with, "What will it take to get you?" I declined, as I'm not for sale. Having declined 2 of the 3 offers, I chose to come to Kansas, and that is 46 years ago. I think that after 46 years, I am entitled to have an opinion about Kansas. And yes, even though I was forewarned, I have found nothing wrong with Kansas. Yes, there are certain things I had to get used to. For instance, I do not like the really hot days. And the older I get, the more they bother me. But I'm not alone in that. I've heard other Kansans huff and puff about the weather. I looked up the weather in the Agricultural Yearbook of 1941, Climate and Man. The average for Kansas is not bad. There are more or less 50 hot days and 50 cold days. I don't mind the cold days. So what is wrong with Kansas? We have to be careful here. Are they talking about Kansas the land or Kansas people? Are they talking about Kansans? That was not the word they used in the title of the TV program. It said Kansas. Because I'm talking Kansas now, the land. There's nothing wrong with Kansas land. I found the word wrong interesting. Before I came, I had read up on Kansas land. Actually, the title of my PhD dissertation I wrote at the completion of my study says it. The title, Factors Influencing the Use of Plant Material to Develop a Functional Regional Landscape in the Great Plains. I'd looked at maps and knew what to expect. Seeing it in reality when driving through the state was all extra. There was nothing wrong. I knew that out west there would not be forest. To be a forester in Kansas is different. We don't have the forest fires. Oh yes, we burn prairie. But it is absolutely true, if you love skiing and mountain hiking, you're in the wrong state. Don't blame the state. It's your choice. And if you like swimming in the ocean, then you are a few million years too late. Again, the wrong state. Don't blame Kansas. You made a choice. What I like about Kansas is its location in the middle of the country. You can go in all directions. You can go to the mountains in Colorado to ski, and you can drive to the beach to swim. The latter is a long drive, but you can do it. And once we have the coronavirus under control, we can go again. But Kansas offers us other experiences. There are the monument rocks and the wonder about them. We are horse country to ride the western trails. Even if we ride short sections, we ride history. The movement through and settlement of the land. We have the culture, the history of the American Plains Indian. Yes, much has been destroyed, but we settled the land. It was J. Bronowski who wrote, "Man is a singular creature. He has a set of gifts which makes him unique among the animals, so that unlike them, he's not a figure in the landscape, he's a shaper of the landscape. In body and in mind, he is the explorer of nature, the ubiquitous animal who did not find, but has made his home in every continent." There's nothing wrong with Kansas. Now, Kansans, that is something I'm not going to touch. As the old painter friend whom I met a couple of times in the old cowboy hotel in Ellsworth wrote me on one of his postcards, "Gus, we are all characters." To understand Kansans, listen to them and read their books and poetry and listen to their songs. And remember, that the book, The Wizard of Oz, is not just a children's book. Adults can read it too, as there's a lot of meaning behind the story.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That'll do it for our Wednesday edition. Before we go, this reminder about our podcast service for listening to or downloading each day's broadcast. That's at agtoday.net, agtoday.net. Please take advantage of that as you see fit. Meantime, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.